Author Ta-Nehisi Coates has been on a big media tour promoting his new book, The Message. One of the highlights of this media tour has been a recent conversation he had on CBS News this morning with Tony Dokubil, where both of them clashed over their competing interpretations of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And as I've been watching Coates make his arguments and promote his new book, I couldn't help but recognize the phenomenon that he, as a public intellectual, so to speak, embodies, which ties to our current cultural moment, a phenomenon that is wholly manufactured and that I believe takes advantage of the worst impulses of and the worst fears of us as Americans, and then secondarily, us as human beings. And so in this video, we're going to kind of walk through why his recent media tour demonstrates this. We're going to walk through some of his history as a public intellectual, and we're going to explain a little bit more on how the media manufactures certain figures to sell us a vision that is unhealthy for us, but is quite beneficial for their ratings. Before we get into my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary of the philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to help us get our message out there. My friends, we are close to 20,000 subscribers. I am so excited. I believe that more people can benefit from hearing our message and thinking about politics in a little bit more of a deeper way than they normally do. My friends, thank you guys so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, Coates' new book, The Message, is summarily about telling stories, in his words, of people and groups that cannot tell their own stories. And one of these stories that Coates has decided to tell is the story of Palestinians who live in Gaza and also live in the West Bank, or at least the Palestinians that he talked to. And this brings us to the contentious interview that has gone viral on the internet and has gotten a lot of attention between him and Tony Dokubil of CBS News. So during this few-minute segment, Coates was there to talk about his book, and Tony Dokubil, who was incidentally Jewish, decided to challenge his assertions within the book about Israel, because Coates takes a very critical view about Israel. Here is a simple exchange from that particular event. Go.
Talented, smart guy. Leave out so much. Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk.
Now for this, Dokubil has been censored by CBS News. Apparently, his pushing back against Coates violated the network standards, and Dokubil himself says he violated the network standards, which is actually very interesting to me, because what he simply did was challenge Coates' assertions in an environment, in a sterile environment, where they were not being challenged. And this is actually reflects something deeper about the pathology of old world media thinking. This idea that journalists are meant to be these objective arbiters of information, disembodied from their own interests, disinterested with the matters of the world, beyond simply disseminating information to the masses. Well, when you embody this kind of belief and you think this way, you lack moral conviction. And if you lack moral conviction, or at least you're not willing to show moral conviction, then how can I trust you will be a good conveyor of information? Because to be a good and moral conveyor of information implies you're going to be truthful. Because if you're not going to be truthful, how can I trust the information you're going to convey to me? I can't. So, the objective journalist actually flies in the face of what morality demands of those who are entrusted to be custodians of information. The truth is not a neutral prospect. The truth is a partisan, it is a biased, it is a partial prospect, because it says what it says, and it does not say what it does not say. A little aside there, I think this is very important for us to understand, and why I think it's good that the old world media paradigm is crumbling amidst the decentralized explosion of alternative voices, some who are good, some who are bad, some who are neutral, some who add a lot of value, like hopefully I do, to all of your lives. So, Coates, but what's interesting to me is not the clash over the Israel-Palestine conflict. Like, a lot of people are getting caught up within that particular element of the story. What's interesting to me is some of the other things that Coates has said in other interviews and how he phrases his arguments throughout all of those interviews. You see, because far too often, my friends, we get too caught up in the minutia of the day. Right. He'll have a debate with a person who supports Israel or does not support Israel, and we'll focus on that conflict, and we will immediately take a partisan stance on that particular topic without realizing that there are things that are bigger than that particular topic that are implied by the way we discuss certain events. And so I'm going to demonstrate that to you in a moment. So Coates went on another interview, and he basically said that he does not know that if he had been in the situation that a lot of Palestinians born into Gaza were in, if he would have condemned or even not participated in the October 7th massacre which hit Israel. Go.
And I haven't said this out loud, but I think about it a lot. 20 years old, born into Gaza, which is a giant open-air jail. And what I mean by that is if my father is a fisherman, and he goes too far out into the sea, he might get shot by somebody off of, the side of Israeli boats. If my mother picks the olive trees and she gets too close to the wall, she might be shot. If my little sister has, cancer and she needs treatment because there are no, facilities to do that in Gaza, and I don't get the right permits, she might die. And I grow up under that oppression and that poverty, and the wall comes down. Am I also strong enough or even constructed in such a way where I say, this is too far? I don't know that I am.
You definitely make similarities between the black struggle in America and the Palestinian struggle. And there are people who look at the black experience in America and say, actually, there is similarity between the black experience and Zionism. There have been very prominent black supporters of the Zionist movement historically. What do you make of that critique, and where do you see the relationship between, or solidarity between, black Americans and the Palestinian struggle?
I mean, I think as a factual matter, it's actually correct. And I think it's understandable. I mean, I think, it is natural for a group of people who are under oppression to look, to an example of another group of people who have, suffered centuries of oppression at the hands of the West, culminating with the terror and the disaster and the industrialized genocide of the Holocaust, and say, wow, it looks like, on the basis of nationalism, that these people have made themselves strong. Why can't we do the same thing? I mean, I think that's a natural impulse. But one of the messages of the message is that the job of the writer is to look deeper, to look past that, to see, okay, what is the essence of that? What does that mean? And for us, for me, my hope is, for my people, that the message is not merely that slavery is wrong because we are the slaves, but that it is an actual interrogation of systems and a belief that those systems should not exist in the world, no matter.
So there are several problems with the way Coates talks about these issues that have very little to do with his partisan perspective on the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and much more to do with his epistemology. Coates views complex issues and complex historical social problems through the lens of lived experience. I have talked about why lived experience is an inferior way to understand things. I'll touch on it briefly here. Lived experience simply anoints one person's perspective over the other range of perspectives that exist in the world. Number one. Number two, lived experience is unable to account for things that go outside of the person's own independent experience. Understanding knowledge and reaching a sound conclusion necessarily involves challenging your own beliefs. And then it also involves going beyond yourself, going beyond your head to analyze situations through different lenses, through different levels of analysis. If we could simply reduce everything, or reduce meaning, or reduce understanding to lived experience, no one would be able to discern truth from falsehood, because it would simply be a matter of perspective. We would live in a relative world where nothing could be achieved because everything was subject to the whims of the human mind, rather than things being constant. And we can observe that things are constant in the universe. And yet, despite these very basic epistemological facts, Ta-Nehisi Coates insists on using lived experience as the dominant standard of value for him to engage in these issues. That is a significant problem to anyone who is actually interested in understanding these issues for what they are and having a holistic perspective and not simply a perspective that makes them feel good in their own hubris. The second problem is that he seems to discount counter-arguments to his points on the basis of lived experience. Now, whenever you engage in a counterpoint to someone who is against your argument, you must address their counterpoint faithfully, you must address it charitably, and you must address it most importantly in a way that is going to satisfy their objection. But if their counterpoint goes outside of your lived experience, or goes outside of your sort of emotionally driven thinking, you will not be able to address it. But this is by design. Coates is trying to sell books. He's not trying to chase truth. And I'll get to this more in a second. And then number three, these two problems, number one, basing knowledge on lived experience, and number two, rejecting counterpoints on the basis of lived experience, these two problems actually allow him to justify behavior that would be morally abhorrent under any other circumstance or any other kind of thinking. So it's very easy to justify correcting a perceived wrong towards oneself if lived experience is the only metric by which you do that. But a person that has a holistic sense of moral thinking is going to consider the wide range of implications and consequences their actions would have before they take them, and they're also going to consider the various principles that are meant to guide their actions. They're going to consider, okay, is this an act of self-defense or an act of vengeance? Okay, how will this impact the community? Okay, how will this impact me and my immediate family? Okay, but someone who is simply concerned about a one-dimensional aspect of their life cannot possibly consider all of these things. That person lacks wisdom, and that person then therefore becomes a dangerous person to society because they are not thinking, they are solely feeling. That is why Coates can say, well, I don't know if I would not partake in the massacre of 1,000 plus people because I don't know, I got hurt. You don't know. No, you know, but you are refusing to embrace that knowledge because you would rather have a one-dimensional view of complex situations. Regardless of what you feel about the Israeli-Palestine situation, this should be very basic understanding. This should be a very basic truth. Now, I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I was going to talk about the kind of figure that Coates represents. The truth is, my friends, the only reason why someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who essentially not only said he does not feel sorry for what happened during 9/11, but dehumanized the victims of 9/11 by saying that their deaths bring him no sorrow. And I'm basically paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. The only reason why he has a place in the public discourse, and the only reason why he, someone who dresses up in non-arguments and literary prose, can have the kind of platform he has, is because the media class manufactured him. They published his writings and gave him a stage before an audience of Americans who were inundated during the time he rose to power and influence with nonsense about the supposed evils of America. And this kind of reflects a more broader point that he made in a clip I showed you about the West. He essentially blamed the West for the struggles of black people. He essentially blamed the West for the struggles of Palestinians, when in all reality, Western civilization, in the accumulation of its historical understanding, of its moral understanding, the birth of certain philosophies and ways of dealing with these issues, has actually given us a basis to object to terror, has given us a basis to object to unrestrained warfare, just war theory, has given us a basis to actually create a more humane society. He has villainized all of this and dismissed it with the wave of the hand solely by appealing to lived experience. The only reason is because he is taking advantage of the worst impulses of us as Americans and as Westerners. He is a creature of a media environment that preys on all of our worst instincts for clicks and for fame, and preys on our fears, and then expects us to act as if those fears constitute the whole world. This is one of the reasons why whenever a major shooting happens involving an African-American person, the immediate assumption is not to evaluate the circumstances of that situation. The immediate assumption is that black people in general are under attack, and therefore the system needs to be torn down. This was the exact same leap in logic that was made by the racial thinkers of the early 2020s, by the Black Lives Matters and the charlatans that engage in that kind of stuff. In a world of reality and common sense, and not the common sense that many of you may think, well, isn't that just common sense? No. Because just because a lot of people think something does not mean it makes sense. Real common sense, which actually evaluates what civilizations have held to be historically true for generations, basic truths that have sustained them in a world of reality and real common sense, Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his arguments, fall flat. He is merely, in a world of that, an artist who views these issues, who views the plight of the Palestinians, who views the historical ills of black Americans, who views all these different things as a blank canvas upon which to paint his version of the world, upon which to project his emotion. And the notion, before I close, that black Americans should somehow be compared to the Palestinians, well, that is actually ridiculous on several levels. Because number one, under Coates' theory, this suggests that black Americans are still experiencing oppression, and that, in his words, the black experience is an experience of oppression, and it's an experience of slavery, and an experience of dismal action. When in all reality, the past 120 plus years in American history disproves all of this. Despite the Jim Crows, there were still very successful African-American enclaves in this country. Despite the discrimination, there were still very successful African-American inventors in this country, many of whom have done things that have altered the course of the country. One of these inventors managed to create the first closed-circuit camera system, which has birthed the home security industry. Without them, you don't get your Ring doorbells, you don't get any of that. One of them managed to apply different ways of creating peanuts, George Washington Carver. There's just so many different inventors throughout American history and so many different luminaries within the black community that disprove the notion that the black experience has been one of oppression. But more than that, the notion that there is a single black experience is an exercise in a fallacy. And that fallacy is nothing more than collective thinking. Collective thinking, which relies on a disembodied narrative, not subject to, as I mentioned, the different implications of an actual study of a particular thing, but instead subject to the fascinations of people who are allowing their beliefs to inform their view of reality, not reality inform their beliefs. It is simply that. And that's what Coates is engaged in when he says the black experience is the Palestinian experience. But I must also say, regardless of what you think about the Israel-Palestine conflict, it is a fact that there are Palestinians that live in Israel as full citizens with rights. It is a fact that there are Palestinians at every level of the Israeli society living and working harmoniously. So then I must ask, what is the Palestinian experience? That question may elicit anger from some of you. That question may even elicit claims that I'm trying to take a particular side. I have no side when it comes to that conflict, but I do have a side when it comes to truth. And as far as the truth is concerned, I don't like disembodied thought forms being used to guide discussion around what is otherwise a complex, intense issue that has the ability to boil over at every second and set the world on fire in the form of World War III. Does Ta-Nehisi Coates care about these wild implications of what he's doing? Perhaps not. I don't know. But what I do know is that this kind of figure, this nihilistic figure, this figure that exists solely because they were birthed by an ecosystem that is sterile and unhealthy and simply seeks to get you hooked and keep you hooked on bad ways of thinking. This kind of figure must no longer get our approbation as people. This kind of figure must no longer be given the satisfaction of public engagement, and this kind of figure must no longer be able to go out and have a market to sell the kind of stuff he wants to sell because we decide to engage with it. I don't advocate censorship. I advocate association. I advocate withdrawing your association from these kinds of figures so that our culture can instead be built with healthy voices that disagree, of course, but that are operating on the solid ground of truth and not operating from literary prose, from artfulness and thinking, and from narratives that are disembodied from our world and reflect a very, very poor view of knowledge. That is the ultimate takeaway from the Ta-Nehisi Coates phenomenon that every thinking person must take, in my opinion. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our messages out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.